is the Two Marketeers podcast, where hosts and marketing experts Sean Patrick and Lindsay seek to uncover what makes brands so powerful in how they impact modern society and culture.
Two Marketeers. They've got a podcast. The Two Marketeers podcast.
And we're back. Part 2, baby, of the innovation born from crisis. Hi, Sean Patrick.
If you don't know what we're talking about, go back and listen to last week's part 1. Hi, Lindsay. Where were we, Lindsay?
We were in our first part of this innovation born from crisis topic, talking about the QR code. And we were wrapping up that episode with the notion of the creative and advertising industry kind of being forced into coming up with brand new ideas and all these things that can make it a real challenge to land ideas that are innovative, but also effective because of the pressure cooker this industry is under to come up with creative ideas no one's ever seen before.
Yeah. I like that. The pressure cooker, right? Should I be creative or should I be innovative? Oh, I'm supposed to be all of it. Crisis.
Yeah. Which again, we were saying is really the role of strategy. Like we figure out what the problem is, what the behavior is. We feed all of those elements into creative. And then I think it's truly where our job begins is working alongside creative teams with strategy and creative together to make sure that the ideas we're coming up with lean into real consumer behavior and are going to land business goals for brands and businesses and clients.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about last time.
Yeah, you said something really insightful.
Surprise, surprise.
No, you said something really insightful where we were talking about the QR code. And to summarize it served a certain audience well on the business side, POS, all that stuff. But it wasn't until a bunch of different things had to happen and line up those planets before it could be useful in changing a problem, which was COVID. Yes. And that's what strategy can do for you. I wrapped up last week saying a strategist needs to consider innovation. That's their goal. And they do so by understanding what are those things that make it the right solution. A creative is more around, okay, now I have that information. How do I do it in a very unique way in context with who the client is and what they're trying to do? That's the difference. The role of a strategist is to say, okay, this is the problem. What things are happening in the world of the consumer that makes this a good idea?
And that's the role of discovery, which a lot of timelines want us to truncate. Because it's like, we don't have enough time to do a discovery. Well, we need to understand the landscape. If we don't understand what's going on culturally, in that case with QR codes, it was a global pandemic, what's going on.
No touching.
With consumer behavior. Yeah. Social distancing, no touching, still needing to access information without physically touching things.
Yeah.
So like, this is the role of discovery, I think, in innovation, is understanding what's going on in the world with the people and what is the value that this business or brand or experience provides to them. And then how do we use that information as a kickoff to creative to innovate in a really interesting way?
Yeah. It's like this, when shit has to happen.
Yes. So that's when shit has to happen is a perfect segue.
Perfect.
Yeah. So shit happened.
Crisis.
In the example that I am going to talk about. So I looked at many different examples of innovation and crisis, and I'm like, they're just not like, I get it. And now we do those things and that's great. Or maybe we do them long-term or maybe we don't. But what I think is a very interesting topic that's close to our heart is the future of podcasting. So my innovation in crisis is the shift in the podcasting landscape and how when COVID hit, we moved from out of studio, which is a physical experience, to a virtual experience, then opened up an entire world of how you can innovate around creating podcast content. And that was kind of something that was spurred out of crisis. So For our Marketeers listeners who don't know, Sean and I began this podcast in studio. We used to record in studio together. We put ourselves through a podcast camp for 6 weeks where we recorded every week. Was it 6 weeks or more? And then we recorded a bunch of our first episodes in studio together. And then COVID hits and you're like, okay, we can't be physically together. So we need to either we stop doing this podcast or we rethink how we do it.
The thing that podcast camp taught us is whether we're good or not, we love doing this. I think at first it's like, well, we need to know we're good. And then in the end, it's like, irrelevant. This is fun.
Yeah, we like it. We like doing it, which is why we do it.
Yeah.
So upon doing research, obviously, I'm reflecting upon our own personal experience. This was an environment ripe for innovation around the podcasting industry in general. And so this didn't just happen to us. This happened to the world. And like we were saying in our QR code episode, there were a bunch of other innovations that were in place that didn't take off until they were needed also in that moment of crisis when the pandemic hit.
Right.
What happened for us was we said we wanted to continue doing this. How are we going to make it happen? Okay, we're going to change to virtual. We're going to have a platform. We are going to have to record. And because we're recording audio, we may as well be recording video because I don't think we ever really cracked how to do video well in studio.
We didn't do it.
Yeah, we were two scrappy podcasters. So we didn't have a couch and cameras and we didn't have a production team. We didn't have anything.
We still don't.
But that's really interesting because innovation around creating video content took place during COVID for podcasters with platforms like Zoom that were around before COVID, but didn't take off until this video experience was needed. And now they say Zoom and the wide adoption of that is what's led to the conference call being dead. So like, has anyone ever said to you recently, let's hop on a conference call? Like we used to do that.
Here's the code.
Yeah, on the old school phones with the little pod that sat in front of you so everyone could hear properly.
It was so high tech.
Yes, conference call is dead. Video calls are everything. But because of Zoom already inventing itself and innovating to adopt to different behaviors that needed to happen during COVID, that enabled us to innovate the way in which we craft this podcast. So now we have video content. Now we're able to create video kind of clips and snippets because of that, which enables us to live on platforms like YouTube, which enables us to have video content that goes on social media, all of which would not have happened had we not been forced out of in-person recording for this podcast. And so as I thought about that, this is an industry, podcasting industry-wide innovation pressure cooker, I will say. I love the pressure cooker. We're now forever talking about that.
Okay.
So innovation took place in kind of two ways within podcasting. The first was around how podcasts are produced, with them being virtual, with people being in different locations, with them being video, with now like AI tools enabling teams.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the one side of the innovation that took place was the production. And then the other side was consumption. So consumer habits also dramatically changed during the pandemic, which fueled podcasters to innovate to meet those different habits.
Right.
So people were consuming more at home instead of like using it as a commuter tool, like to and from work.
Yep.
People were looking for kind of like smaller moments. So like the formats changed. They either looked for these like small kind of 10-minute snippets they could watch or listen to while they were doing something else, like folding laundry at home. Or on the other side, they wanted these like deep 2-hour immersive, like entertainment like experiences because they were bored and they got to the bottom of Netflix and they had nowhere else to go and a lot of time to kill. So it kind of forced podcasters to choose a lane, choose different lanes in the way in which they create the content around podcasts, the length, the format, whether it's video. So a lot of innovation happened born out of crisis during that time, I would say during the production and the consumption of podcasts, and is now only like continued to escalate since that crisis took place. And all of that is because of changing behaviors and consumption habits. And the people now have this as an ingrained thing that they do or listen to, which is a massive opportunity for podcasters who can continue to innovate how they create their content.
Yeah.
So this is why I didn't think I had to run this idea past Sean, because I'm like, it's so close to our hearts around how we've created this podcast over the last 5 years and how it's changed.
Yeah. I think, okay, so as you're saying all this, I'm like dead on everything. And something really interesting happened to me this week. So to Lindsay's point, I have adopted Zoom as day-to-day necessary. I'm 100% remote. We talked right before the holidays that I was seeing a client for the first time in 7 years, who is a client that I work with probably on average 10 to 20 hours a week if you averaged it out over the 7 years.
It's wild.
I have adopted without feeling I had to adopt, because I had to adopt. Do you know what I mean? Like when a solution comes up, because that solution thought about me, thought about my situation, my scenario, the things I believe in, blah, blah, blah. When it came out, I didn't have to think about anything other than almost a too good to be true. It shouldn't be this easy, right?
Right.
That's not creativity in my eyes. It's innovation. And I had a quote from this great article I read from the World Economic Forum last episode. And it was really just about understanding that creativity and innovation are not the same thing, but they're both crucial. So you need both. It's about understanding a little bit of distinction of, well, when do I need to be which one? And it sums it up by saying, in other words, you can't have innovation without a healthy mix of creativity on the front end and solid systems in place that foster ingenuity. Ingenuity is what they want. Calling it innovation or creativity is up to us to decide and motivate ourselves and do our process, make our process, whatever it is, the right mix of, this is a moment I need to be creative and think of something new. This is the moment I need to be resourceful and think, is there anything out there that exists, that is adopted? So I talked about the QR code, same thing. It was in place for a specific function, and then COVID happened, and now everyone uses it. The same thing for Zoom. And I think it's the thing that happened to me this week too. One, I had a new client call, and I set up the meeting, and it was in Zoom. And the first 5 minutes of the call, and I'll be honest, I'm pretty sophisticated when it comes to what technology to use, especially in communication. The first 5 minutes of the call was being made fun of because I was old school and used Zoom.
Why? What would they use?
Everybody uses Teams. Anybody in any kind of, for the most part, not to generalize, but if you're in a corporation.
Don't even get me started. Because I think what you just said was, this shouldn't be so easy, which is what makes it highly usable. And when the QR code took off, I think people would say this shouldn't be so easy, because in the past it wasn't easy. And when it became widely adopted, everything had changed to make it so easy. If Teams could make it easy.
Okay, before you go into the red, that's the thing, is different things for different people, right? I think Teams addresses enough of the needs for someone who is on a Microsoft 365 or whatever it's called.
Yes.
It's just an addition, and it completely integrates, right? It's implemented into something I already use. Right. We were in a different circumstance where it wasn't something we already used. What we had done, and it was hard, was we felt the need to have to download some kind of software or app that did what Zoom does today. Because back then, a podcast, who does podcasts, right? So it just solidifies to say, where I'm kind of I think it's so funny, because if I just said, well, I have a podcast, and it's awesome. The technology is so advanced. And of course, I was made fun of for actually doing a podcast. And who listens to podcasts? But Lindsay, another
That's what
time.
Said, who listens to podcasts?
Yeah, it's but anyways,
80 million needs, Americans.
but Teams, innovatively, let's be honest, you were right. Zoom was the innovative one. They were the ones who did the Apollo 13 and sat in a room and saying, holy crap, there's a problem, and we have the opportunity to understand how to fix it.
Yeah, it's go time.
Right. What Zoom did and how people everyone was on Zoom, then the copycats came out. But then it became necessary. We demanded to be able to have video conference. And that's the beauty of innovation, is to say, okay, so innovate in your own way. But the story of Zoom, just like the QR code, is they were a giant, right? Is they respected the giants. The giants of technology, the giants of communication said, look, what we know, we're, small and scrappy. That's just what I picture. The right combination of people, I gotta believe, got in a room and decided to be innovative, decided to be creative about how they approached innovation.
Yeah. Would you interchange the word innovation with change, like innovate and change? Because it's kind of like how people say like change or die kind of thing, like for us, it would have been either we stop doing the podcast or we change. And are you open to changing how you started doing something to make it better?
I think one can't happen without the need of the other.
Change.
So innovation, the problem we have a lot of times in our tech-driven world is innovation is almost mistaken for creativity. That need to change is what drives innovation.
Yeah.
But thinking that change is the result isn't. It's the problem, how we solve the problem, how we change, because what the solution to the problem is, that's the whole process. It's like you and I say it all the time. People are like, okay, well, we need to fix this. How are we going to fix this? Smart person says, I don't know yet. A person who respects process, I don't know yet, but let's find out.
Because does innovation require the result to be better or just different?
The result to be correct. It's a great idea, but is it the right idea?
Yeah. So it's better. Because if it's just different, it may not be better.
I'm going to say right now, oh my God, please don't think I'm an innovation expert. But the way I have to reconcile it as someone who needs to do both of those things, depending on the situation or the challenge I have to solve, change is what has to happen. Like that's the first, do we all agree shit has to change? Because I need to know that you recognize that change has to happen and you have an idea of where you're willing to make that change happen. Because if you're not, you will not come out with anything that's innovative.
Okay, Sean, we are wrapping this episode up. Part 2 of innovation born from crisis.
We're in a crisis. Go innovate.
And we're not.
No, we're not.
No, thanks.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Have a great day, Marketeers. Thanks, Sean.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Two Marketeers podcast. New episodes launch every 2 weeks.
Find the Two Marketeers podcast on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you like to listen. And be sure to rate and subscribe.
Listen on our website, thetwomarketeers.ca, or you can ask Alexa to play the Two Marketeers podcast.
Want to keep in touch? Follow the Two Marketeers on LinkedIn or at Two Marketeers on TikTok. We've always got something to share.
This podcast is over.